Imagine being born into a world where power, fear, and violence are part of everyday life. For some, it's a legacy that's impossible to escape, a name that sticks with them no matter how far they go. From mafia families in Sicily to cartel kings in Mexico, these individuals were born under the shadow of their infamous fathers. But not all of them chose to follow in those dangerous footsteps. Some tried to break free, while others remained loyal to the world they were born into. This is the story of the sons of once powerful mafia bosses living in the shadows of their families' legacies. John Angelo Gotti Jr. The name John Gotti still echoes in the world of organized crime, even decades after his prison sentence and death. He remains the face of the mob, and no one understands that legacy better than his son, John Gotti Jr. Born on Valentine's Day, 1964, in Queens, New York, Gotti Jr. didn't spend much time with his father growing up. Why? Because when Jr. was just 5, his father was already serving a 3-year sentence in Pennsylvania for hijacking cargo. Even with the prison time and street violence, Gotti Jr. idolized his father. He knew the streets came first for his father and accepted it. As he once said, there was nothing he didn't like about that life. The code, the action, the streets were his father's first love, and he came second. By action, we're not talking about movie-style shootouts. We're talking about real-life violence. Take the tragic story of John Favara, for instance. Favara, a regular guy and warehouse manager from Queens, accidentally hit and killed 12-year-old Frank Gotti Jr.'s younger brother while the boy was riding his minibike in 1980. It was ruled an accident, but in the Gotti household that didn't matter. Gotti Sr. didn't cry in public, but behind closed doors Jr. remembered hearing him sobbing. Victoria Gotti, Frank's mother, was devastated. At one point, she reportedly attacked Favara with a baseball bat when he came to apologize. A few months later, Favara disappeared. Witnesses claimed a group of men beat him near his workplace, shoved him into a van, and he was never seen again. Rumors later suggested he was dissolved in acid. Years later, Gotti Jr. admitted what many had already suspected. His father ordered the hit. And just like that, any illusions Jr. had about his dad's world vanished. By then, he was grown, up and ready to step into the family business. In 1985, after John Gotti Sr. orchestrated a plan to kill boss Paul Castellano, Gotti took control of the Gambino crime family. With his father in charge, Jr. rose quickly. By 1988, he was officially in the family business, and by his mid-20s, he was the youngest capo in Gambino history. Already involved in gambling and loan sharking, he called his induction the proudest moment of his life, feeling like he was finally like his father. But it wouldn't last. In 1992, John Gotti Sr. was convicted of racketeering and murder, thanks to mobster-turned-informant Sammy the Bull Gravano. Gotti Sr. was sentenced to life in prison, and Jr. stepped up to keep things going through the 90s. But the ICE feds were after him too. In 1998, Gotti Jr. was hit with a list of charges: loan sharking, bookmaking, extortion, and more. Facing serious time, he took a plea deal and served nearly 7 years behind bars. Before heading to prison, he had a final heart-to-heart with his father. Gotti Sr. tried to convince him to stay loyal and keep fighting, but when Jr. told him he was done, his father finally said, "You're your own man, but don't think the government will stop. They'll never let you go." And he was right. Even after serving his sentence, the government kept coming. Between 2002 and 2009, Gotti Jr. faced multiple indictments, including a plot to kill radio host Curtis Sliwa for bad-mouthing his father, but none of the charges stuck. After 4 missed trials, the feds gave up and Jr. walked free. Now, Gotti Jr. says he's out of the game for good. All he wants is to be a husband to his wife Kimberly and a father to his 6 children. From mob, prince to family man, that's a plot twist. Giovanni Rina. On February 21st, 1976, Giovanni Rina, the second son of Salvatore Toto. Rina, the notorious boss of Sicily's infamous mafia, Cosa Nostra, was born. When Giovanni turned 25, he was convicted for his role in 4 murders, earning him a life sentence. When the verdict was read, he stood quietly in a barred holding cell before briefly speaking with his lawyer through the bars. Growing up surrounded by organized crime, Giovanni didn't stray far from his father's path. He was deeply involved in the Mafia from a young age. In 1996, at 20, Giovanni was arrested in Corleone on charges related to Mafia association and a string of murders committed in 1995. These included the deaths of Yeppe Yamina, Giovanna Hamina, Francesco Saparo, and Dr. Antonio Darro. In a chilling move, Darro's body was dissolved in acid, a grim tactic the Mafia often used to erase all traces of their victims. This brutal act marked Giovanni's official entry into Cosa Nostra, sealing his commitment to the Mafia's criminal world. Salvatore Riina, Giovanni's father, was a ruthless figure known for his cold, calculated decisions. One infamous act of his was the brutal killing of 12-year-old Yeppe De Matteo in 1993. Yeppe's father had agreed to testify against the Mafia, and in retaliation, the Mafia lured the boy with Mafia members disguised as police officers, promising to take him to see his father. Tragically, the day in question marked Yeppe's last day as a free child. Initially, the Mafia didn't plan to kill him. They intended to use him to pressure his father, who had agreed to testify against the Mafia in the investigation of Judge Giovanni Falcone's murder. They believed that by torturing the boy and sending photos of his suffering to his father, they could break him. The boy was locked in a cage, starved, and beaten for over 779 agonizing days. When patience wore thin, Salvatore ordered Yeppe's death. By then, Yeppe was so weakened by the torment that he couldn't even fight back. After killing him, they disposed of his body in acid to ensure there would be no evidence left and that the boy's family would never be able to give him a proper burial. The execution was carried out by Giovanni Brusca, Salvatore's loyal enforcer, who was arrested in May 1996. When Salvatore and Giovanni were eventually arrested, it sent shockwaves through the Mafia world. Their downfall showed that even the most powerful figures weren't untouchable. While this didn't end the Mafia's influence, it caused some members to rethink their methods. They moved away from the violent, attention-grabbing tactics of Salvatore and Giovanni and adopted a quieter, more business-focused approach to avoid attracting too much attention. Even after Giovanni was sentenced to life in prison, he reportedly tried to influence the Mafia from behind bars, sending coded letters and maintaining connections through his family. However, over time, the old guard's control over the organization began to slip. Giovanni followed his father into the brutal world of organized crime and ended up serving a life sentence. In contrast, his younger brother, Yeppe, took a different path. Born in 1977, just 1 year after Giovanni, Yeppe grew up during his father's reign over the Cosa Nostra. Life was relatively good at that time. However, in 1993, his father was arrested after decades of being one of Italy's most wanted men. For a while, it seemed like Yeppe might not follow directly in his father's footsteps. In the early 2000s, he tried to keep a low profile, but being a Riina meant that staying unnoticed was almost impossible. In 2002, at just 25 years old, Yeppe was arrested for Mafia association. He served a short sentence and was released in 2011. After his release, Yeppe did something unexpected. He wrote a book. In 2012, he published Reina, Family Life, A Father's Story, which read like a sympathetic memoir about growing up with one of Italy's most notorious killers. In the book, he spoke affectionately of his father, portraying him more as a misunderstood family man than a cold-blooded mob boss. This did not go over well in Italy. Politicians, journalists, and even Mafia experts were outraged. Many saw the book as an attempt to humanize Toto Riina and subtly revive the Cosa Nostra's legacy through nostalgia and soft PR. Rumors circulated that Yeppe had also flirted with politics. In 2014, he even ran for a seat on the local city council in his hometown of Corleone. His candidacy triggered a national scandal, with critics arguing that allowing a Riina to run for office was like inviting the Mafia back into public life. He eventually withdrew, But the damage was done. It was seen as a symbol of how Mafia influence still lingered in Italy, especially in places like Sicily, where the Rina name still carried weight. Even though Yeppe wasn't actively committing new crimes, he couldn't escape his bloodline. Italian authorities kept a close watch on him, scrutinizing his every move, including interviews, book tours, and public appearances, looking for signs of Mafia revivalism or coded messages to the underworld. In recent years, Yeppe has kept a lower profile. With his father dead, Toto Rina died in prison in 2017, and his brother Giovanni serving a life sentence. Yeppe is the only Rina's son still walking free, though he remains heavily watched, especially in Sicily. Another person with a complicated childhood was Nicodemo Scaro Jr. Growing up as the son of one of the most feared Mafia bosses, Nicodemo Scaro Jr. never had a chance at a normal childhood. He was practically born into the Philadelphia mob scene, and when his father landed in prison, Jr. tried to carry on the family legacy, though not very successfully. His father, Nicodemo, Little Nicky Scarfo, wasn't your typical behind-the-scenes mob boss. He had a temper that could go off over the smallest thing. While most crime bosses kept a low profile, Scarfo was loud, aggressive, and downright terrifying. If you even looked at him wrong, he might have you swimming with the fishes. But Junior wasn't like his father. He lacked his dad's brutal presence. And in the Mafia world, that was a serious flaw. On top of that, Junior had to deal with a lot of enemies his father had made during his violent reign. Scarfo Sr. had racked up a long list of people wanting revenge, and once he was arrested in the late 80s, all hell broke loose in the Philly mob. Without a clear leader, it turned into a free-for-all of backstabbing and power grabs. When word spread that Scarfo Jr. might try to step into his father's shoes, many weren't having it. Some saw it as their chance for revenge. In October 1989, while having lunch at a Brooklyn restaurant called Ribbit, Scarfo Jr. was ambushed. A gunman walked up and shot him 8 times, neck, arms, chest, you name it. But somehow, he survived. It was a clear Mafia hit, no question. Despite being riddled with bullets, he stuck to the code and didn't reveal who was responsible for the attack. After that, Scarfo Jr. wisely stepped away from the Philadelphia spotlight and connected with the Lucchese crime family in New York, likely seeking protection and a fresh start. Fast forward to the mid-2000s, and Scarfo Jr. decided to transition from bullets to boardrooms. Together with his partner in crime, Salvatore Pulo, he orchestrated one of the most audacious mob scams in recent memory. They quietly took over a Texas-based mortgage company called First Plus Financial, placing family, members and trusted associates in top positions while posing as consultants. Then, they drained the company of over $12 million through fake contracts, fraudulent deals, and outright theft. Scarfo Jr. went on a luxury shopping spree, buying mansions, fancy cars, and even a yacht. The rest of the stolen money was funneled into offshore accounts and shell companies. Anyone who got in their way was dealt with the old-fashioned way: threats, burner phones, and code words. However, the authorities eventually caught on. In 2011, the FBI arrested Scarfo Jr., Pulo, and their crew. After a lengthy and chaotic trial, Scarfo Jr. was convicted in 2014 on multiple charges, including racketeering and fraud, and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Since his release, Scarfo Jr. has remained quiet, with no flashy comebacks or signs of returning to the mob life. It seems he may have learned that not every legacy is worth reviving. Another person who faced similar struggles was Raymond Patriarca Jr. Like other Mafia children, Raymond Jr. was born into mob life. His father, Raymond Patriarca Sr., was the feared and iron-fisted boss of the New England Mafia, running operations with brutal efficiency. Violence was a part of the job, and he built significant power and wealth, providing for his family's comfort, at least financially. But here's the issue with mob dynasties. The next generation often doesn't have the same toughness. Most of these sons, including Raymond Jr., didn't have to fight their way to the top. They grew up with people serving them, not fearing them, which softened their edge. After his father's death, Raymond Jr. stepped up as boss, backed by the Mafia Commission and the powerful Gambino crime family in New York. However, he lacked the same presence as his father, which led to internal chaos, especially from underboss Gennaro Gino Di Giovanni, who had little respect for Jr. and tried to take control of the family while imprisoned. Still, Jr. managed to hold on to power, thanks to loyal allies like Consigliere Ilario Zanino. Eventually, however, the heat caught up with Jr.'s crew, which was involved in racketeering, extortion, drug trafficking, and gambling. In 1990, he and underboss Nicholas Bianco were arrested, and by 1992, Jr. was sentenced to 8 years in prison. After serving his time, he stepped away from the mob world and is now reportedly focused on real estate in Rhode Island, his family's former territory. Joseph Bonanno Jr., the youngest son of the legendary mob boss Joseph Bonanno, who helped shape New York's Mafia, chose a different path. His father was a powerful and feared old-school crime boss, but Joseph Jr. wasn't interested in following in his footsteps. While his older brother Bill tried to keep the family business alive, Joseph Jr. pursued a quieter life. He studied animal husbandry at the University of Arizona and later ran a ranch in California with his wife. However, trouble found him in the 1980s. He and his wife were arrested for selling cocaine to undercover agents and were later caught up in a fraud scheme involving fake historical posters. Despite not following the traditional mob path, Joseph Jr. still ended up serving time. While his father built a criminal empire, Joseph Jr. became the quiet son who tried to escape his father's legacy, only to find that escaping the weight of the Bonanno name was impossible. Next, we have Alejandro Coronel. Being the son of a cartel boss comes with risks, but few face them as young as Alejandro Coronel, whose life ended in a brutal act of revenge. His father, Ignacio Nacho Coronel Villalba, wasn't just a high-ranking figure in the Sinaloa cartel, he was also a kingpin in the meth trade, making him a top target for enemies. Unlike many cartel heirs who inherit power as adults, Alejandro was thrust into this violent world early. By 16, he was already involved in operations, and his last name made him a target. In April 2010, the Beltran Leyva cartel, former Sinaloa allies turned enemies, kidnapped him. Although he wasn't a major player, his family name made him a valuable target. Days later, he was executed, and his body was left behind as a warning. Ignacio responded with bloodshed, launching a wave of revenge against those responsible. However, months later, Ignacio was killed by Mexican forces. The cartel war continued, but for the Coronel family, it was already lost. Alejandro never got the chance to prove himself, but the next heir in line did, until a shocking decision changed everything. Vicente Zambada Niebla, growing up as the son of a cartel boss, was never just another kid. His childhood was not about school or soccer, games. It was about power, secrecy, and the burden of his father's name. His father, Ismael El Mayo Zambada, ran the Sinaloa cartel for decades. While El Chapo was hunted down and imprisoned, El Mayo remained untouchable, a ghost in the criminal underworld. Vicente was his heir, groomed to continue the empire. He wasn't just a cartel heir spending his father's fortune. He was deeply involved in the business, overseeing drug operations,